They said the wind carried secrets across the Wyoming plains, but I'd never believed it. Until the day Boaz Cutter walked into my schoolhouse. Something about the way the door creaked open, letting in not just the September sunlight, but the weight of an unspoken purpose, told me my life was about to change. If you've ever felt that quiet certainty, that moment you know a single choice will alter the rest of your days, then you already understand why I'm telling you this. And if you believe in stories where grit matters more than roses, where a woman's worth is measured in the steel of her resolve, then you'll want to like and subscribe before we go on, because this one isn't about fairy tales. It's about survival, truth, and the kind of proposal that makes the whole town stop talking just to listen. I'd been teaching at Red Fern Ridge's one-room schoolhouse for 8 years, long enough to know every face in town and every rumor that rose with the prairie dust. My days followed the same rhythm. Rise before dawn, stoke the fire, walk the quarter-mile to the school, guide children through arithmetic and reading, then return to the silence of my small cottage. It was a predictable life, one I told myself I was content with. I had long since buried any thoughts of marriage or children, replacing those tender hopes with neat rows of chalk-written sums and well-thumbed books. But that morning, as I leaned over Tommy Fletcher's desk helping him muddle through 7 times 8, I caught the sound of boots on the porch steps. Not the hurried shuffle of a parent late for a lesson, nor the timid tap of a child arriving late. These boots carried weight and purpose. When the door opened, his shadow filled the threshold. Boaz Cutter, taller than any man had a right to be, his shoulders broad enough to block the light. He held his black Stetson in both hands, the gesture oddly formal, like a man about to speak in church. I knew him by sight, of course. Everyone did. Owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties, a man who broke horses with whispers and had once, so the stories went, fought off a pack of wolves with nothing but a knife. But I'd never stood this close to him, never had those deep brown eyes fix on me as if measuring the very grain of my soul. "Miss Wyn," he said, voice low and rolling like distant thunder. "Might I have a word?" The children went silent, the air in the room tightening like a pulled drawstring. I told Sarah Mitchell to help Tommy with his sums and stepped out onto the porch with him. The September wind tugged at my hair, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the distant sound of cattle lowing. I folded my hands, a habit from years of polite conversation, and met his gaze. He didn't waste time. "I need a wife," he said plainly, "and you need strong sons to guard your winters." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They hung in the air between us like frost and sudden cold. No flowers, no courting, just a statement carved out of bedrock, as immovable as the man before me. "I'm not asking," he added gently, but with the finality of a man closing a gate. "I've got a ranch that needs a woman's touch. Winter's coming hard this year. You've got no one to see you through it. This town isn't kind to unmarried women, and it won't get kinder." It should have insulted me, the bluntness, the lack of romance. But there was something disarming in his honesty. No false promises, no pretty lies. Just a proposition laid out like a contract between equals. Still, I found my voice enough to say, "Mr. Cutter, I hardly know you." "I don't want a girl," he said, his eyes holding mine. "I want a woman who knows her mind, who's faced life and not run from it. Someone I can talk to when the work's done. Someone who can stand with me in this country. You've been doing that here for 8 years. That tells me what I need to know." I thought of my cottage, of the quiet that wrapped around me at night like a too-thin blanket, of my mother's wedding ring, tucked away in a drawer, a relic of dreams I had once believed dead. His words stirred something I hadn't let myself feel in years, the faint flutter of possibility. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "Marriage," he said. "A partnership. I won't pretend it's love, but it'll be respect, and I'll see to it you're provided for. In time," he paused, as if measuring his words. "In time, maybe we'll find something more." I asked for time to consider. He agreed, touching the brim of his hat before striding back to his massive bay gelding and riding off across the prairie, his figure shrinking against the endless horizon. I stood there long after he was gone, the wind cool on my face, the echo of his words tangled in my thoughts. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the marriage contract he'd left, a handwritten document and neat, educated script. It outlined everything. I could keep teaching. I'd have my own allowance, separate quarters at first, and the respect due a wife in public. Affection was not required, though it might come. The language was so practical, so deliberate, that instead of feeling cold, I felt oddly safe. This was not a man who made promises he couldn't keep. By morning, the news had spread like fire through dry grass. Mrs. Henderson from the Mercantile stopped by for tea, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Is it true?" she asked the moment she sat down. "Boaz Cutter came to see you at the school?" "Yes," I said, pouring tea, keeping my voice even. "What did he want?" "He asked me to marry him." Her cup rattled against its saucer. "Boaz Cutter? But he's never—" She stopped, searching my face. "And what did you say?" "That I'd consider it." She frowned, clearly unsure whether to be impressed or appalled. "Abigail, marriage to a man you don't love? Are you certain this is wise?" "Wise." I thought about the winters, the loneliness, the narrowing of my future with every passing year. About the steadiness in Boaz's voice, the way he looked at me without pity, without condescension. "Perhaps not," I admitted. "But perhaps wisdom isn't always about safety. Sometimes it's about choosing a different kind of life." The rest of the day, my thoughts were a storm of what-ifs. I remembered the small kindnesses Boaz had shown over the years from afar. Fixing the Fletcher fence when their father was injured, donating supplies to the school without fanfare, listening in church without a word but with full attention. He was a man of action, not talk, and maybe that was what I needed. By evening, I'd read the contract 3 more times. I thought about what it meant to be wanted not for my dowry, my looks, or the convenience of my presence, but for the strength I had built in the hard years alone. I thought about the way his words had rung not as flattery, but as truth. And as the prairie wind sighed against my window, I began to suspect that saying yes might not be the end of my independence, but the beginning of something else entirely, something neither of us could yet name, but both of us might one day fight to keep. The morning I rode out to Boaz Cutter's ranch with the signed contract in my reticule, the air was sharp enough to sting the lungs. I'd tucked my teaching slate under my arm out of habit. It had been my companion for 8 years, and it felt right to bring it along on the day I stepped into a different life. The Cutter Ranch lay between 2 low hills, the log house positioned to catch the morning sun, but shielded from the worst of the wind. From a distance, it looked solid and unmoving, like it had been waiting for me all this time. Boaz was at the corral, mending a bridle with hands that could crush stone but worked leather with surprising gentleness. When he saw me, he set the work aside and crossed the yard in a few long strides. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes flicked to the paper in my hand like a man bracing for a verdict. "I've made my decision," I said. My voice was steady, though my heart was beating in my throat. I held out the contract. He read it without haste, scanning each line. When his gaze reached my signature at the bottom, a quiet breath left him, like a rope releasing from a tight knot. "You're certain?" he asked. "As certain as anyone can be about stepping into the unknown," I said. "But I have conditions." "Boaz," he corrected gently, "and I expected as much." "Go on." I told him I would keep teaching, at least for now. I asked for separate bedrooms in the beginning. I made him promise not to shape me into some ideal of what a wife should be. He agreed without argument, each time with a simple nod, until at last I asked if he'd respect me as I was. He met my gaze for a long moment before saying, "I asked you because of who you are, not despite it. I don't want another woman. I want you." 2 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, we were married in Reverend Matthew's small church. My blue wool dress was plain but serviceable. My bouquet a surprise from Boaz. Purple asters and black-eyed Susans gathered from the hills. The vows were practical, nothing of love or cherishing. When he kissed my hand at the end, there was no performance in it, just a steady warmth that left my eyes unexpectedly damp. The wagon ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of us aware of the strangeness of sharing a seat as husband and wife when we were still, in truth, strangers. I noticed the swept porch, washed windows, and fresh curtains. Inside, the house surprised me. A well-stocked bookshelf with Shakespeare and Dickens, a parlor with an upright piano, a kitchen in tidy order. My room upstairs looked east over the hills, with a small desk positioned to catch the morning light. "For your schoolwork," Boaz said. That night we shared stew he'd made himself, the silence between us no longer sharp-edged but tentative. He asked about my students. I told him about Tommy Fletcher's stubborn arithmetic and Sarah Mitchell's quick mind. He listened, truly listened, as though the rhythms of the schoolhouse mattered to him as much as the cattle in his pastures. Our early days settled into a rhythm. I rose before dawn, prepared breakfast, then walked to the schoolhouse. Boaz worked the land, repaired fences, checked stock. Evenings were spent in the lamplight, me grading papers or reading, him working on ranch accounts. With each passing day, words came easier between us. In late October, while planting the kitchen garden, he'd surprised me with, the first real shift came. "I can hire someone from town to do that," he said. "I want to do it," I replied. Feels hopeful. We worked side by side, speaking of weather, seed varieties, the threat of frost. It felt natural. It felt shared. But not everything was easy. Red Fern Ridge had eyes everywhere, and before long Marcus Blackwood's gaze turned toward us. Blackwood, who owned the neighboring ranch and carried himself like a man who'd never been denied anything, had apparently been circling the Cutter land for years. Over dinner one evening, Boaz told me Blackwood had been asking questions, whether our marriage was real or just a legal convenience. "He seems to think a woman like you wouldn't tie herself to a man like me unless she had to," Boaz said, his jaw tight. The words stung, not just for me, but for him. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "That it's none of his business," Boaz replied. "But I think we should start acting a little more married. For appearance's sake." That Sunday, I took his arm walking into church. I sat close enough for our shoulders to brush. He rested a hand at the small of my back when we greeted neighbors. I saw the change in people's faces almost instantly. Even Blackwood's calculating eyes narrowed as he took us in. After the service, Dr. Morrison told Boaz, "Marriage agrees with her. She looks happy." Boaz squeezed my arm just slightly and said, "I'm a fortunate man." His words were meant for public ears, but the look he gave me was something else entirely, quiet, warm, and unguarded. On the walk home, I thanked him for caring about my reputation, about my work. "I know this isn't the marriage you'd have chosen if—" "Abigail," he interrupted. "I asked you because I wanted you, not someone else. You." It stopped me as surely as a hand to the chest. For all our practicality, there was something here neither of us had bargained for, something we both, I realized, were beginning to want. That night, in the lamplight of the parlor, we sat together for the first time on the same sofa. I worked through lesson plans while he read Tennyson. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It felt like the breath before the first line of a story neither of us had expected to write. I found the forgery by accident, hidden in a book from the church library. The ink was too fresh, the handwriting too studied. When I showed Boaz, his jaw tightened. "Blackwood," he said. "He's been planning this for years." Before we could act, Blackwood arrived with 4 armed men, demanding the north pasture. His threats made it clear he'd had a hand in Boaz's father's death. Fury steadied me. I told him we had proof, that we'd take it to the authorities. He gave us until sundown to surrender. That night, Boaz brought out an old Winchester. I took up a pistol. "Teach me," I told him. "I'm not hiding while you fight for what's ours." By morning, word had spread. Friends from town came to stand with us. I took position at the upstairs window as riders appeared on the horizon. The fight was short. Outnumbered and trapped, Blackwood surrendered. The forged deed was safe in our hands. When it was over, Boaz found me still at the window. "You stayed," he said. "We protect each other," I replied. That night, watching the prairie glow gold in the setting sun, I knew the truth. He hadn't just needed a woman to guard his winters. He needed me, and we'd face every season together.